Let me ask you a question. Have you ever looked out into a landscape in a video game and just thought, I wonder where that ends? Looked at a vast in-game landscape and just felt the need to explore it. Felt the need to go that direction and see where it takes you. Of course, the imagination of looking at a game's landscape like this somewhat wears off when you come to the obvious realization that the map ends somewhere. This landscape doesn't go on as long as I continue walking through it. If I kept walking, I would find the world border, and that would be that. There is no mystery, no I wonder where that ends moment, because you already know where it ends. It ends at an invisible wall. It ends at an ocean, or a canyon, or a river that you can't cross. It seems, the thought of looking at a landscape and wondering where it ends, or wanting to map out a direction and simply walk, is exclusive to reality. But even this is limited to an extent. Earth is a sphere. If I kept walking, I would just reach the ocean, though it would take much longer than in a game. And even if there wasn't an ocean to stop me, if I kept walking in the same direction on Earth, I would simply end up back where I started. Sure, it would take years, but with enough courage, I would have made so much progress that I made no progress at all. But some games don't accept this. Some games simply don't care. Travel all you want, you'll never come back to where you started. Nor make it to an end for that matter. Ironically, this approach to making a game, Elite Dangerous being the size of a literal galaxy as an example, suffers from the exact same problem as walking around the Earth. No matter how much you travel, you never make any progress. There's simply too much progress to make. So much, it might as well be infinite, rendering any quote progress at all completely useless. However, Earth repeats itself. Elite Dangerous, and games like it, do not. Elite Dangerous, almost to the point of meaninglessness, has made a world so painstakingly massive that despite a very active player base and nearly 10 years of time, only a whopping 22 million star systems have been explored. 22 million out of 400 billion. Less than 0.05% of the galaxy in Elite Dangerous has been charted, despite its nearly decade-long existence. It took the very active and dedicated Elite Dangerous community 10 years to explore 0.05% of the galaxy Elite Dangerous is set on. And it isn't like the game makes you too slow to explore everything. The game allows you to move many thousands of times faster than the speed of light. It's the only way you can get between stars. Without your frameshift drive allowing you to travel many thousands of times faster than the speed of light, it would take literal years to get from one star system to another. But what's even the point of having a galaxy so big? So big that no one can fully explore it? For me at least, this infinity seems almost pointless. What's the purpose of having 400 billion star systems to explore, despite the fact that it would take hundreds of times your lifespan to see all of it? It's not like the game requires it. The main gameplay of Elite is simply to grind for materials, for better ships, hunt for bounties, and do all sorts of other things, yet nowhere in that equation is a one-to-one scale model of the Milky Way required. It seems there's a certain awe to the infinite. Maybe it's good advertising, a sort of pathos-driven message of, this game is so darn big that you can never truly finish exploring it. And it's cool, isn't it? A lot of people, when faced with the question, is this game too big, answer with, no. It's cool that way, I like the size, or some variation of that. Which leads to the inevitable question, are we making games that defy nearly every conventional rule of an open world, the main one being it is actually able to be explored, simply because it's neat? I don't think so. It's nice to look out at every dot in space and know that everything you see is available to be explored. Yet the seemingly unnecessariness of all of the space has always made me wonder why it exists. Why is the world of Elite basically infinite? It's meaningless. It's a meaningless infinity. The concept of a meaningless infinity is one that isn't exclusive to games with actual infinite worlds. It isn't even exclusive to games at all. Sometimes, games can simply present a world that has an implied infinity. You can't explore every inch of the desert in Fugue and Void, but on a subconscious level, you can be astonished by the true implied distance of it. Something about Elite Dangerous is that the infinity it deals with is one that's natural. It is the infinity of the cosmos, of our Milky Way. What about the infinity of something less organic? Something more artificial? The concept of an infinite man-made thing, say a building, is a lot more strange than the ever-reaching distances of outer space. Why would anyone ever need a building that goes on forever? How would anyone build such a structure? What would be the point of it? This point, along with many others, is the central idea in the manga Blam. Blam is a manga that ran from 1997 to 2003. It is set in a far dystopian future. In the story, humanity had previously had control over the robotic builders that had created their cities through an advanced and rare genetic trait. After that trait was wiped out by a virus, the city's builders, free from the confines of order, built the megastructure, also known as the city, indefinitely. We follow our protagonist, Killy, a cyborg who is in search of a human with the net terminal gene in order to control the builders of the city once more. That is the basic plot of Blam. But I would be doing a disservice to the manga if I ended on such a simple explanation. While yes, that is the basic idea of Blam, there is often very little dialogue that expresses this so-called main intent. In fact, our protagonist is completely silent. The story, and even Killy himself, mostly takes a back seat, and instead, the city is treated more like a main character. We often see wide shots of the megastructure, with Killy simply looking out at it. It's a city hostile to human beings, both in the architecture and with a security system attempting to kill anybody it finds. We humans are used to the idea of abandoning our structures, abandoned factories, malls, places we have built and left behind. And there can be something very uncanny about that, but Blam dives into the much more daunting reality of not humanity forgetting a place, but a place forgetting about humanity. Abandoned buildings are already like this in a way. Eventually, nature grows through the cracks in the ground, metal rusts, and the entire thing could easily collapse with nobody to repair it. In a way, abandoned buildings forget humanity the same way humanity forgot about them, but not in Blam. The city can forget about humans. The humans cannot forget about the city, because the city is so colossal in size that it is impossible for any human to find their way out. While the size of the city is never explicitly told to us, we can only guess at the true scale of it. I mean, this city has surpassed the orbit of the moon. It has rooms that are the circumference of Jupiter. For all intents and purposes, if you are a life form in the megacity, it might as well be infinite. But this infinity wasn't made for you. It is a place with no point. The builders were given one command, and they will act on that plan with nobody to stop them, no matter how distorted the structure is from a human perspective. And it is painfully obvious once you look at the places in the city more closely. These stairs being steeper than what is safe, as well as having no railing. These bridges, also with no railing, dangling over a void. These massive skyscrapers that jut out of the ground and serve no apparent purpose. The megastructure seems to be made for people in the same way that a cave is made for people. Neither of these things were made with people in mind, yet there seems to always be a way forward. Why are there bridges between these two structures if the builders didn't care if you were able to get across or not? Why are caves just the perfect size to be explored by people? Despite the structure being hostile to humans in every way, there still seems to be some basic humanity in the design. That, despite the fact that the city is an infinity not designed with purpose or for anybody, moving through it is still possible. Whether that be due to the construction of the structure or the stubbornness of humanity. These story elements and subtle details are never conveyed through dialogue. Often, it is large sweeping photos of the megastructure that tell the real story. A picture contains 1,000 words after all. Knowing all of this, it makes sense that Tsutomu Nihei, the author of Blam, studied architecture, because this is one of the only pieces of fiction that I've ever seen that is able to convey a story so well from mere buildings. And the knowledge that these dehumanizing monoliths and bridges that lead nowhere go on for virtually forever makes the world of Blam feel all the more hostile. These hallways never end. These corridors stretch out longer than you can comprehend. Attempting to find an exit to the structure is as pointless as attempting to explore every star system in Elite Dangerous. No matter how long you search, and no matter how long you walk, you will never make any progress. In the story, Killy is around 3,000 years old. I can't imagine, in those 3,000 years, he even made a dent in his exploration of the megastructure. A place without purpose, and a being who lives to explore that place indefinitely. That is the true plot of Blam. Mangas like Blam are a great reminder of how effective visual storytelling is at not only making the audience appreciate the world, but also as a tool for narrating the story in a much more interpretive way. While a manga is a fine way to get this point across, I think video games are a far superior medium when it comes to visually telling a story. And I can't think of a game that does that better in the context of this video than the 2014 game Naissance. When playing Naissance, it's not hard to see the obvious inspiration Blam had on the project, and Naissance's designer, Mattison, is very open about this. There are many places in Naissance that have the exact same feel, with sometimes even the exact same kind of architecture. These stairs that are way too short for anyone to reasonably climb are just one of many examples. Naissance takes place in a similarly brutalist structure as Blam, an inhumane world, one where our protagonist, Lucy, is lost in. And that's about all the backstory we get. Unlike Blam, there are no builders that went out of control or any real explanation for what any of this is doing here, which makes everything even more unsettling. What could be the reason a structure like this was built? And you begin seeing hints that this place was not made for people. Much like in Blam, there are many things about the world of Naissance that makes it feel unsettling. It's unsettling in the same way the Backrooms are unsettling. Who would make any of this? Who would build any of this? Who is this for? These questions are never answered, we can only assume. But weirdly, the world of Naissance feels intentional. Much like Blam, there is always a way forward. No matter how weird or unsafe or how ill-designed the space is for people, there always seems to be a way to go. Not that our protagonist goes anywhere, there are no net terminal genes to find or enemies to kill like in Blam, but there is always somewhere to go. And I know that might sound ridiculous. Of course there's a way to go, it's a video game. But Naissance does a really good job at not telling you where you need to go. The world wasn't designed for people, and in a strange way, it also feels like the game was never designed for the player. We only seem to stumble across certain things that help us go from where we are to somewhere else, while never expressly making any progress. There isn't a place you need to be. Rather, it feels like everywhere is equally alienating. In fact, it seems like the world intentionally or otherwise tries to halt our progress, but not in a way that feels intentional. More like a byproduct of the simple fact that this space wasn't designed for people. Weirdly though, despite Naissance making it expressly clear that this place was not made for you or anybody, there still seems to be signs of life around Naissance. Some buildings appear to resemble apartments with some of the lights turned on, what looks to be a bar or a restaurant of sorts, someone's kitchen. If you look long enough, you might even find a child's bedroom. When you enter it, time slows down, almost as if reality in this inhumane world breaks down the moment something resembling a human-made creation is found. And finding these human-looking rooms is such an oddity. It almost feels unsettling to find a place like this because few things in this world are at all human. A bedroom serves a purpose, as a place to live in and sleep in, or even to do work in. A kitchen has a purpose, so does a bar, and these are all purposes served for people. These are the only examples of that in the entire game. Everything else is meaningless creations with no form that spreads infinitely in every direction. Sure, the world is grand, seeing all of the structures while you're so little around it might be profound, but there is no rhyme or reason to any of this. The question of what was this place made for becomes redundant when in the context of a space such as Naissance. There isn't a point, and that's the point. At one point, you come across a large bridge that runs across this colossal corridor that spans a huge distance. There are other bridges as well, all of them slightly different. The corridor also occasionally produces lightning bolts, yet another reminder of the hostility of this world. While looking out at this corridor, I couldn't help but see the irony. All of these bridges lead to the other side of this chasm, yet never with the intention of actually transporting anyone. Naissance's world breaks reality in more ways than one. The infinite nothing is one thing, but another thing I noticed about Naissance was the structure of its progression, where, once you notice it, it's hard not to constantly be reminded of it. The game's progression maps a descent into this world, going further and further down, getting deeper and deeper into the meaningless, until at one point you discover a set of stairs that, for the first time, goes up. You start eagerly climbing, hoping to make an ascent for once, and then you keep climbing, and you keep climbing, and keep climbing, and keep climbing. I must have climbed these stairs for 10 minutes thinking there was something at the top, preparing myself for whatever I was about to see, but then you realize it. If you walk up to one of these doors on every other flight and wait long enough, it opens. And no matter how long you ascended the stairs, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, you always end up in the same place, exactly where you started. A pointless set of infinite stairs, a metaphor for the game itself. It's almost cruel. The game is filled with these cruelties. Later in the game, you come across another flight of ascending stairs. This time, they actually lead somewhere. You walk up these stairs, and while they take several minutes to climb, it feels like finally you're ascending. But when you get to the top, you reach yet another infinity, a desert that extends on forever. You look up, and despite all of the steps you walked up, it seems like you're under the structure you explored earlier, even deeper than you were before, at the bed of this desert. And then you jump down into a ravine, seemingly canceling out all of the progress you made on ascending tenfold. You seem to fall for much longer than you climbed up, rendering your entire journey pointless. But why does it even make a difference? Ascending, descending, left or right, it doesn't matter where you go in Naissance or how far you go. No matter where you choose, it's all the same. A pointless infinity. Jorge Luis Borges is an author that often writes about infinity. You might not have heard his name, but I'm sure you've heard of some of his stories. His most iconic being La Biblioteca de Babel, or in English, the Library of Babel. The Library of Babel takes place in an infinite library with an infinite number of books. Each room is exactly the same in the library, a hexagonal space with books covering the walls floor to ceiling, along with a balcony that looks over other rooms that descends infinitely. Each book in the library has exactly 410 pages with 40 lines of text, each containing 80 characters. Due to the nature of infinity, every book that has ever existed is kept in this library, as well as every book that could conceivably ever be made. Every single thing you can spell with 25 characters is in this library. The cure to every known disease, the outcomes of wars that haven't even begun yet, a perfect description of how you will die, and every description of everything that has ever happened in the entire universe since time began. Of course, a byproduct of this is unintelligibility. If every combination of 25 characters exists in this library, then the majority of books aren't likely to contain anything at all. Just a jumble of letters. This is what about 99.9999 hundreds of nines later % of these books are, gibberish. A wide array of pointless infinity for you to waste your time attempting to find meaning in. In Borges' own words, for every rational line or forthright statement, there are leagues of senseless cacophony, verbal nonsense, and incoherency. But that doesn't stop our unnamed narrator. Despite the fact that even finding a single cohesive sentence on a page in the Library of Babel is extremely unlikely, our narrator, who is an unnamed librarian, along with many others in his situation, dedicates their lives to search for meaning in the meaningless. Every hour of every day, our narrator looks through books attempting to find something, anything. The thought of even finding a sentence, a nugget of information, keeps our protagonist going. The librarian often talks about how frustrating it is knowing that the information they seek is somewhere in the library. Facts about everything, the fundamental rules of the universe are somewhere here in this library, but the meaningless infinite that clogs every bookshelf makes it impossible to find the meaningful. The narrator often talks about finding a certain elusive book called the catalog. In the story, it's a source of great fascination among the librarians, because the catalog is envisioned as a comprehensive guide that, if discovered, would provide a systematic means for navigating the library. It would contain the precise location of all the books, each hexagon, shelf, and volume, enabling a librarian to find any desired text without the need for endless exploration. But even the narrator admits that it would just be another book on the shelf. Of course, even if this elusive catalog was found, how would we know it was real? I mean, there is most definitely a catalog of every book somewhere in this library, along with an uncountable amount of false catalogs. And this is true for every piece of information you could ever hope to find in the library. Somewhere in this library is the cure for aging, but there is also a near infinite number of false cures for aging. So even if you found something, it would be so unlikely to be true that the chances of you not only finding a cohesive sentence in the first place, but also finding that the thing that sentence is talking about is true, might as well be zero. This concept of an infinite library with every possible combination of letters, unintentionally creating every written thing that has ever, could ever, and will ever exist, is a great story. It's really something to wonder about. What if the library existed in real life? Could the library ever exist? Fortunately, that is a question that has an answer. This is the Library of Babel in digital form. It is the exact same as the story. There is an infinite amount of books with an infinite range of characters. Everything that could ever be written is in here. Ideas for movies that haven't come out yet, the full names of your great-grandchildren, and a perfect description of the end of humanity down to every last detail. It is all real, and it is all here on this website. If you ever wanted to know how big the Library of Babel is, we have an answer to that too. There are approximately 10 to the 4,677 books in the digital library. To give you a sense of scale for this impossible to fathom number, there are only 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. Keep in mind, exponents grow exponentially, which is why there are around 10 to the 40 atoms on Earth. 10 to the 4,677 is a number we don't even have a name for. It is a number with a 1 followed by over 4,500 zeros. It's one thing to hear something like this existing in a story, but the idea of a perfect description of what will happen to you tomorrow being in a random book in a random section of the library hits much harder when you know that it actually exists somewhere. Somewhere in the library is the answer to everything. I was talking to a friend a few years back about the Library of Babel website. I was telling him how the cure to cancer exists in one of the books, and him, much like the majority of people who first hear about what is contained in the library, with all of the frustration and excitement of the librarian in the story, starts going over all the possibilities. What questions could we answer? What could we find? Why aren't we searching this library? Why aren't researchers, much like the librarians of the original short story, trying to find answers in the library, or even a catalog that would correctly point them to books containing answers? It's the same reason our narrator goes his entire life without finding anything. 10 to the 4,677 books, each with 410 pages, and you think you are going to be the one to finally find something. A person couldn't even explore a tiny fraction of the library within the lifespan of the universe. And yet, I still find myself scouring the library with the false hope that maybe, just maybe, the library might reveal something to me. Although it never will. The real-life Library of Babel, much like the fictional library, is an infinity plagued with nonsense that makes it meaningless. There is another section on the Library of Babel website that you might have noticed when looking at the front page called the Image Archives. If you thought the existence of a description of everything was mind-bending, you clearly have yet to see the Babel Image Archives. The Babel Image Archive is a lot like the Library of Babel, only instead of storing every piece of text that can ever exist, it instead stores every image that has or could ever exist. This website contains an image of everything. It contains an image of every piece of famous lost artwork, every moment in every past and future wars, a slideshow of the entire universe as it has and as it will happen. It even has pictures of you. Many pictures of you, in fact. It contains a near infinite amount of pictures of you, as it does for every object and everything, all contained in a 640 by 416 pixel area. You can find all this by clicking the Universal Slideshow, which picks a number between 1 and basically infinity, and starts counting up, showing a new image every 3 seconds. Despite the endless possibility that this entails, you will never find anything but noise. You will never see the blueprints for a time machine, or your own funeral, or any cohesive image whatsoever. It is a statistical impossibility, because of the fact that the vast majority of images are simply randomized pixels of various colors. You will not see into the future using the archive, but it is a good thought experiment, something fun to think about, because, again, much like the library, the archive is so clogged with the meaningless that finding the meaningful is pretty much impossible. Which, by the way, the image archives are much bigger than the Library of Babel. Like, much bigger. So much bigger that it makes the library look tiny in comparison. While the Library of Babel contains a measly 10 to the 4,677 books, the Image Archive contains 10 to the 961,755 potential images, or a number with a 1 followed by nearly a million zeros. As Solar Sands points out in his wonderful video about the library and image archives, every single page of the Library of Babel also exists as an image in the archive, proving one does truly fit into the other. Think about a picture of something completely random. Whatever random image you just thought about is somewhere on this archive. Pictures on your computer or phone only you have ever laid eyes on are on this archive. You can demonstrate this by using the search feature on the archive. Take an image from your computer. It doesn't matter if it's just some random screenshot or something that's never been on the internet, or just an image that only you have seen. Searching for it will give you an exact image of it on the archive, complete with its number in the universal slideshow. But as I said earlier, these images are impossible to find. It almost feels like a waste. It's a shame. We have all of this at our fingertips. An image of how our universe will end, or the blueprints of a space shuttle we will use in the year 3000, but we will never find it. It is lost in a sea of random noise, lost in an infinity lacking definition, lost in a meaningless infinity. I've talked about multiple games in this video that had what some would call arbitrary infinities. Elite Dangerous is so big that its size loses all meaning. Naissance's world seems so big and seemingly filled with architecture no human would design that the artificial space in which you exist seems like it's there without a purpose. But the game Manifold Garden handles infinity a bit differently than those other two, because the game isn't so stupidly big that it's impossible to explore in a lifetime, or so conceivably big and meaningless that it would warrant questioning for why it exists in the first place. Instead, it's a game that's infinite in the same way you could call a sphere infinite. Technically, if you kept going one way on Earth, you would never find an end. It would just repeat itself after a little while. It's the same thing in Manifold Garden, although it's much more immediate. Manifold Garden is a puzzle game, a hard one at that, but it's pointless to give a description with words, which is why there isn't any spoken dialogue. The game instead characterizes what it'll be like in just the first 10 minutes. After leaving the starting area, you realize that a piece of the bridge you need to use to get across isn't here. In a great way to introduce a main game mechanic, the game forces you to fall to get to the other side. This subverts so many video game conventions. Falling equals dying, we all know that, which is why the juxtaposition of falling to get to the other side of a bridge is not only shocking, but introduces you to the type of game Manifold Garden is through its gameplay. In Manifold Garden, you can fall infinitely. This is the game's representation of infinity, everything existing around you all at once, but that everything is simply the platform you're already on. In every single direction, no matter where you face, all you see is the exact same thing. A white, or sometimes black, void with the structure you're on all around you, infinitely receding in every direction. A result of this is that you never truly feel like you've progressed, even when you've gone into another section. I mean, this is infinite. This should be everything. Progress should feel impossible to make, because you can never truly escape the void, no matter how different the things it contains are. The void remains unchanged. Manifold Garden also uses the environment itself to create an almost non-Euclidean sense of space, making the already confusing world make even less sense. Doorways that seem to lead to small rooms actually leading to more infinity, rooms bigger on the inside than the outside. It also doesn't help that you can bend gravity to your will. Turn wall to floor and vice versa, fall sideways, upside down, it doesn't really matter. Although, I guess there is no such a thing as direction in an infinite space like this. Every single structure in the void is the same, making every spire the most important and simultaneously the most unimportant structure. Identicality can be just as effective at portraying infinity as actual infinity, because it's meaningless in a way that's much harder to quantify. This same building didn't need to be repeated a million times. The game would be just as great of a puzzle game with only a couple of buildings and an out-of-bounds zone, yet you will never stop falling no matter how much you do so for. Manifold Garden is set in an expanse without justification, and that's what I love about it. Infinity is a concept that's hard to wrap your head around. It's almost as if it breaks the human brain. Everything must come to an end at some point, but the infinity challenges this natural assumption. Our universe could be infinitely large, expanding in all directions continuously, much like the void in Manifold Garden. And if it isn't, how do these infinities even exist? The image archive has more pictures than atoms in the universe. It seems impossible, like if we unraveled the archive, it wouldn't fit in our universe. But it does. Because I mean, it's not real infinity. This is a computer program. The Library of Babel is a story in a book. Elite Dangerous, Naissance, and Manifold Garden are all video games that don't have the same restrictions as reality. But sometimes, I can be tricked. Whenever I play Elite Dangerous and look out into that mysterious cosmos, the thought that every dot, every nebula, every star I see is actually there, is an actual place you can go explore, makes me think that these infinities aren't pointless after all. It fills me with a childlike wonder. Maybe Elite Dangerous needed to be the size that it was. The stars not being phantom adds to the wonder I feel in space. These infinities can be considered meaningless. The library is so big that cohesiveness is lost. Blam is so inhumane that gigantic structures and infinite architecture dwarf over the people that are supposed to live in them. Manifold Garden simply repeats itself. I mean, it can't get more meaningless than that, right? But how do you even define meaning? Why is the infinity of Manifold Garden meaningless, but the infinity of the universe we live in is meaningful? Really, what is the difference? Defining meaning is impossible, and so is defining a lack of it. Really, it's up to you. And while meaningless to some, a lot of people, even myself included, feel that Elite Dangerous's map should be the size of a galaxy. It would lose something if it wasn't. In a way, the map would be more meaningless if nothing was real besides the space you played in. So despite me acting as if none of the infinities I mentioned in this video had a point to their existence, just know that what might be meaningless to some is the most meaningful thing to others. And maybe, just maybe, the most meaningless seeming things can be the most meaningful after all.